Hi, I'm Eric Caren of the Caren Archive, here today to share some really exciting historical items from the Caren Archive that demonstrate just how history unfolded on paper over the last 6 centuries. Today we're going to look at a number of very interesting, original, rare newspapers, broadsides, photographs, manuscripts, and other examples of how history unfolds on paper. I'm rather proud of the fact that what I have collected, approximately 1 million items or more, represents perhaps the most important private holding of this kind of material in existence. This is one of the icons in American journalism, the Pennsylvania Journal Tombstone edition, protesting the Stamp Act, skull and crossbones on the top, tombstone mourning rules to protest the Stamp Act, and a mock stamp on the bottom right corner of a skull and crossbones. Here's an item that I first learned about as a youngster and a member of one of the first newspaper collecting clubs in the early 1970s, and had to wait till I was an adult and spotted a small ad in an auction ad. The auction was taking place in Pennsylvania, and what it is a special broadside extra coming out to report nothing but the Boston Tea Party in December of 1773. Here we have a broadsheet extra printed in 1775 with a declaration of the causes and necessity of taking up arms, essentially the American Declaration of War beginning the American Revolution. So here it is, the most important document in American history, the Declaration of Independence, printed in full on the front page of the New England Chronicle, July 18, 1776. This is extraordinary in the size of the type employed. Great news from New York with a cut of a colonial soldier, and the essence of it is Washington crossing the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton. When I first spotted this at an ephemera fair, I was delighted. I realized it was a broadside that I'd never seen before. I think there's only one other known copy. It's the famous plan of a slave ship, but it's got a broadside text underneath, printed in Philadelphia in 1789. Here we have 2 early issues of the Cherokee Phoenix, a newspaper printed in both English and native Cherokee language. This is one of the most famous hoaxes in journalism history, the Moon Hoax, created by the New York Sun in 1835, where they had a lot of the world believing that through the use of Herschel's telescope, we were watching little man-like creatures as they walked around the moon. Here we have the first newspaper printed in Hawaii, the Sandwich Island Gazette, Volume 1, Number 1. Here is a Texas Telegraph Extra unrecorded broadside from 1837 reporting the end of the Texas Revolution. Here is the first newspaper printed in California, in Monterey, 1847, the Californian, and the front page contains a wonderful but gory account of the Donner Party. This is the most famous African-American newspaper, the North Star, printed in Rochester, New York in the 1840s by Frederick Douglass. The Union is dissolved broadside, Charleston Mercury Extra, really the first Confederate imprint and an icon from the Civil War. An incredible Civil War item, a number of things interesting about this. It's a Confederate broadside extra. It's printed in the field by Morgan's Raiders, signed in the upper left-hand corner by Morgan himself, and it's the first issue published on necessity paper. One of the most graphic of 19th century newspapers, the sensational National Police Gazette, with scenes relating to the assassination of Lincoln, printed April 22, 1865. Here is the Dewey defeats Truman of the 19th century. Hurrah for Tilden. It's reported that he is going to be our next president, and this was 1876, a false report that Tilden had been elected over Rutherford B. Hayes. One of the great prizes in Wild West history, the Black Hills Pioneer, printed in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, with the first report of the killing of Wild Bill Hickok. Here's a fascinating Western newspaper. It's the only known copy of a Jamesport, Missouri newspaper from 1881 reporting the robbery by the James gang of the train. And the interesting thing is the editor of this newspaper was on board the train when the James gang robbed it. So it's his first-hand account of the robbery and the only known copy in existence. Here we have the local Las Vegas, New Mexico Territory newspaper with a report of killing of Billy the Kid by Pat Garrett. Perhaps the most famous newspaper of the Wild West, the Tombstone, Arizona Epitaph, with the most important story that ever happened in Tombstone, that, of course, being the gunfight at the OK Corral. A St. Louis, Missouri newspaper with a front-page story and very unusual graphic of Jesse James laid out in his coffin after he was killed by Bob Ford. Here we have two incredibly illustrated, sensational newspapers on the most famous or infamous murders of the period, the Jack the Ripper killings. And here's the London paper with a sketch of what they thought Jack the Ripper looked like. And here's the National Police Gazette printed in New York with a picture of the Jack the Ripper killings and a sketch of what they thought Jack the Ripper looked like. Here's an extremely rare paper on a famous disaster. It's a 1906 San Francisco earthquake, but it's printed the same day as the earthquake took place, a day before the famous Call Chronicle Examiner was printed. Perhaps the most famous event of the 20th century, or at least one of them, the Titanic, is represented in many examples in the archive, this being a special photographic supplement to the New York Sunday American. Another great error headline, 1916, Hughes elected president. A stunning and famous picture of the Hindenburg exploding into flames in 1937. One of the finest condition issues of one of the most famous headlines of the 20th century, Dewey defeats Truman, the famous error printed by the Chicago Daily Tribune in 1948. If I piqued your interest with some of the material that I've shown today, I hope you'll check out thecarenarchive.com.